spread
Part
across
2,
the
guys,
country,
of the Shish 17
the world's
reaction.
media rushed to Sodor Island.
They kept trying to interview me. I became a bit of a celebrity.
Controversy on Sodor Island. Questions asked about science ethics.
It's fair to say I was pretty nervous at times,
Joined now by Keith Hartley.
but I think I put on a brave face.
What did you think when you first came to meet Thomas the Tank Engine?
Throw up.
Most of my mates said I looked pretty good on telly. The mayor said I'd represented the people of Sodor very well. It's important to show you're confident when people are asking you awkward questions.
Yep.
Good evening. An act of mercy or a crime against humanity. I am joined now by Keith
Even when some of the questions got difficult, I made sure I knew what I was talking about.
What was your reaction when you first met a talking tank engine?
If you can't make an informed opinion, or if you can't string together two words on telly, well, maybe you shouldn't be on there.
There are two sides to this.
Admittedly, the subject matter was a bit bizarre sometimes.
There are some dark forces at work here.
You're alright, as long as you can win over the audience.
They're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you.
God keeps throwing up all the time when he
The Goethe family refused to answer any questions. Behind closed doors, the only question they agreed to answer had been asked repeatedly. Would Thomas work on the railway? The response was an emphatic no. Thomas's DNA had been reprogrammed to accept and adapt to the engine structure, using the engine's internal system to maintain his organic functions. What no one could be sure of was how much of the engine was mechanical and how much was organic material. Thomas had been able to move around without coaches, but to work on the railway, his engine would need to be fired up and operated by a driver and fireman. Since no one could be sure how much of the engine was Thomas, the pressure caused by the engine could rupture his organs from the inside, and the incredible heat could boil him alive.
Yep, he could probably
Professor
die.
Hans and his father vowed Thomas would never work on the railways. Similarly, the two professors were to refuse many requests by people from around the world.
Well,
who
that's
wished to be
stupid. They're only biofused. They're only biofused.
There were billionaires offering to pay whatever they wanted to be converted into an engine or some other transport. Train enthusiasts too, and people with terminal illnesses were desperate to be made into trains. But for some reason, the Goetzes refused.
But there would be other interested parties, eager to seize on the biofusion gold mine. The independently wealthy Topham Hatt staged a hostile takeover, and within weeks had bought a controlling share in Sodor research.
Of course he's rich in this
Immediately,
universe.
the policy of the company changed, and so did the ethics. The medical supply wing was shut down, and work began on mass biofusion experiments and operations. Anyone who could afford it, some handing over their whole fortunes, were turned into engines. But, along with the new policy, there would be worse to come. Biofused engines would be allowed, then obliged, to work on the railways.
The first one we fired up was James. He didn't have the money some of these people had, and so agreed to basically sign his life away if they wanted to experiment further, or to take massive risks like this. As usual, the fat had everything recorded. All kept classified, you understand.
These recordings, shown for the first time, reveal the extent of Sir Topham Hatt's experiments.
It was horrible watching these engines work on the railways some days. But the tourists wanted to see it. They expected it. And for me, it was work.
But, with the new engine's increasing work schedule, came more and more accidents.
Edward was first to have problems. He'd been filming all day for the new TV series they'd announced, and for his last scene, he had to pull into Wellsworth Station and whistle to the kids on the platform.
Peep, peep. Whistled Edward.
More dead.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Sadly, this was only
This
the
is not
first
the
in an
case, by the
increasing
way.
number
My
of
toast not aimed
incidents.
for that turn and
Harold
grab it.
had an obsession with aircraft and appeared to become a helicopter. The operation had gone well, but we had to ban him from being allowed to attempt flight.
In an experiment kept secret until now, Mavis the diesel engine was to be the first biofuel locomotive used on the railway.
We fueled her up and everything seemed fine. Then things got out of hand.
The diesel began to burn her internal organs. Everything organic in the engine was soon burning.
Well,
Never heard a
what expect you
locomotive
put...
scream in pain. We tried rinsing out the fuel tank with water, but by then it was too late.
Mavis's body would be kept under lock and key indefinitely. In an unexpected U-turn,
Well, Mavis
Sir
is
Topham
dead.
Hatt would ban fueled engines from being used on the island.
Harold was never told why he couldn't fly, but the decision would keep him alive, if only for a little while longer.
Ugh.
In fact, unknown to the outside world, there had been many failed biofusion experiments.
That fat bastard kept the accidents a secret, and legal disclaimers had to be signed by anyone being biofused. So there'd be no legal action taken if anything went wrong.
This footage shows engines being displayed to tourists during the off-season. Many of these engines were failed biofusion experiments and were too ill to work or were already dead.
So we got
They
Mavis
had
dead.
to put a stop to that, though.
And next up is... Percy's dead.
With all accidents happening, everyone started asking the same thing. Why had Thomas, the first engine, worked so well?
Despite all the troubles the other engines had,
Well,
Thomas
if they had
worked fine,
special
seemingly
scientists in
oblivious
Sector
to
17,
the other
none of this
engines'
would be a
problems
problem.
and accidents.
Keeping their problems a secret from the outside world, Sodor Research began selling the technology to other countries in multi-million-pound deals. These countries would have less qualms about the use of fuel engines.
No
and
wonder
even
why
the modern
Thomas and
electric
Friends is
trains.
nowadays
Even
going around
failed
the world.
biofused engines were being displayed publicly in what
But
would
hold on,
become
what season
a kind of
25
freak
got to be
show.
like that? Yep, a
To his
two-faced
horror,
Thomas character.
Professor Hans Goetze saw what this was leading to, slavery of engines, and immediately resigned.
They're meant to work, but
His father, Wilhelm, would go one step further.
so Thomas died as a human, and he's brought back as the train. Edward Blood came out to whistle for some reason. Percy's face fell off. Ugh. Oh, he's looking at his... Does that have the front page? I'm not sure. No wonder why he's killing himself. Dust everywhere.
Professor Wilhelm couldn't come to terms with what was happening to his engines, and took the only course he thought he could take.
Killing himself.
That fat got a load of us rail staff over to his house to clean up after the body was taken away. You should have seen it. Sawdust everywhere. It took us days.
But such attempts to keep the incidents on Sodor a secret were short-lived after a very public accident.
Gordon paid an enormous amount to be Sawdor's first 462 configuration engine. Much bigger than any other engine at the time. We were terrified that fat shite would make us fire up that huge engine.
We were shocked to discover he had insisted on being able to work on the railway. So, one night, after the regular staff had
You know what, I
finished
may
for the
extend
day,
it.
Fat some of the rail staff and I fired up the engine.
As usual, these experiments were filmed. This footage has never been broadcast before.
Dr. Ruth and I filmed it all.
It might be a bit shaky. It was handheld. At first, Gordon complained about the heat. Then that turned to pleas to douse the fire.
But that fat bastard held us back. He wanted to see what would happen.
He argued he had put a lot of work into Gordon, and the chances to get him working were too great an opportunity. He was literally cooking from the
So
inside.
James and Edward
By
are
the
still
time
alive.
we were allowed to act, it was too late.
Well, the engines alive for the minute are
I wasn't
Edward,
as near to him as
James,
some of them.
Thomas.
All I could do was run. I was lucky to get away with some singed clothes. Others weren't so lucky.
The fateful few hours following the accident would seal the fate of Sodor Research.
The fat stopped us trying to put out the fire, insisting that any evidence would fall back on us.
He kept repeating, "This was all your fault. You knew the dangers. You're legally to blame." He stopped us calling for ambulances or the fire brigade.
We told him, these are injured people here. They're going to die unless we do something. But he kept saying, no one from the outside can come in. No one can see this.
Finally, someone suggested we airlift them to hospital. Harold was banned from flying for his own safety, but we thought the risk was worth it.
Fueling Harold was a nervous experience. Would he have the same reaction Mavis had?
We all breathed a sigh of relief
Oh,
and
Harold's
loaded
life
the
for
injured
not for
people
long.
aboard. Then it all went wrong.
Blood out is.
Harold's engine had worked fine, but what no one realized was most of Harold's lower extremities were permanently fused to his propeller system.
As Harold's rotor blades began to spin, vital organs would be drawn into the motor and tear him apart from the inside.
Now he's dead as
Now
well.
there was no covering it up. The smoke could be seen all morning, but news people were here in an instant. We were told to close gates and start clearing up the mess ourselves, with some help.
Henry Thierry was the only 420 gauge engine on the island. A large engine that had been working on the railway regularly, he had become popular among tourists and the locals.
Henry was called into the yard to help tidy the mess. Working mostly at night, he would cart away the wreckage under cover of darkness.
We had to work quickly and quietly. Henry would cart wreckage from the yard away to the sea. Then one night the points were set wrong and we were diverted to another shed.
Henry had inadvertently been sent to shed number 17, where Thomas had been biofused into a tank engine and had subsequently been declared out of bounds.
It was dark and these sheds all looked the same. I unlocked the doors and Henry rolled in. I didn't see what Henry saw, because as soon as he put his head through doors, he bolted and reversed out.
Keith locked the shed up without seeing what was inside. But Henry had seen it all.
We wouldn't even dare talk about that shed, more than our job's worth.
But Henry had decided to speak up and confront Sir Topham Hatt. That night, he arrived at the railway controller's office.
I don't know what was said in there, but there were raised voices at times. They had a shouting match for 10 minutes. Then Henry left, back to the shed.
By
You can
pure
just
chance,
run over
he was
him.
sent back to the same shed as Thomas that night.
That's
And with one
CCTV.
sentence, he sealed both their fates.
Henry only said one thing to him: stay away from shed 17. The next day, the fat had a new job for him.
The Flying Keeper route ran through the night, delivering
Flying
fish
Killer?
from the docks to the mainland, across the highest altitude line in the country.
That old line was treacherous at best, but when Henry was put on there, in the middle of winter, it was a death trap.
Yep, he's
In
dead next.
1970, fish had started being delivered by road to the mainland. It was safer and more cost-effective, and the line was declared
Then the reaction.